Design patterns. Increase your speed here on Programming with Palermo.
You are programming with Palermo. You deliver software. You need to move fast, deliver quality, and run your software with confidence. Stay tuned for timeless solutions, simple methods, and topics that will propel you forward. And now your host, lifelong programmer, author, teacher, coach, Christian, and charismatic speaker, Jeffrey Palermo.
Here I am at the griddle thinking a design pattern is like a recipe. Just the other night, I cooked some hibachi style food for my family. And this recipe for this meal has been around for a long time, and many chefs have added their own flair for the flavor, texture, and even the presentation of this meal. So I'm not inventing this recipe. I have the skills to follow the recipe, to implement it. And if I'm only implementing it, then I can move quickly and the meal will come out well because the pattern or recipe has been proven over time. Design patterns are just like recipes. Sure, some new design patterns come around from time to time, just like new recipes, but our industry has a huge catalog of design patterns that's been around for years. And by choosing the right and appropriate design patterns, your team can move much more quickly by using them, implementing them, rather than attempting to invent new ones. Just like I cooked a delicious meal quickly by following the recipe rather than trying to invent a new type of meal. So a design pattern is like a recipe, and there are high-level recipes and there are low-level recipes. There's recipes for making a gravy, but then you use the gravy as a part of a larger dish. Same thing in software. Design patterns, think recipe. We give it a name and we know that it's a stand-in for some set of structure, some set of ingredients, and some set of the way they work together. And so speed is one of the pillars of the clear measure way. To review, first we establish quality, then we achieve stability, and then we increase our speed and we go faster and faster while maintaining quality and while maintaining stability. And there's no end to how fast software teams can go. And design patterns is one of the engineering practices that you can use to increase your speed. And that's what we're going to talk about today.
Programming with Palermo is brought to you by ClearMeasure, a software architecture company that empowers .NET teams to be self-sufficient, moving fast, delivering quality, and running their software with confidence in Azure. If your team has a project that's too important to be delayed or derailed, ClearMeasure can help, while keeping your team in the driver's seat and growing in capability. Click on clearmeasure.com for more information. If you are an architect or .NET engineer aspiring to become an architect, check out clearmeasure.com/careers. Now, back to the show.
So what are design patterns? It's not new. Going back to the early 1990s, when the Gang of Four, as it's known, the design patterns book came out, elements of reusable object-oriented software. This is when object-oriented software was relatively new, and the Java language was kind of up and coming, and C and C++. We're going to town. Remember, C# didn't come along until late 2001, 2002 era. And so the object-oriented programming and design patterns in general was being talked about in the early 90s, and architectural patterns have been talked about for a long time as well. And there's another book that's pretty popular called Head First Design Patterns. It's in its second edition now. So if you've never even heard of these books or never read these books, these are two that you probably want to give a read. And also the Gang of Four book, there's a website, gofpatterns.com. And design patterns are typical solutions to common problems. And I'm going to go just into a little bit of the structure of a design pattern, but Microsoft also talks a lot about design patterns in various forms. Here's a link to a good friend of mine, Phil Japixi, and he did a multi-series design patterns video interview, and there's the link right there on learn.microsoft.com, and we'll make sure to put this in the show notes. But there's lots of resources out there on design patterns, and you can there's a lot there. So if you're just starting your journey, and you don't really know all of these, this is just scratching the surface. Right here on the screen, I put 16 of these design patterns, and there's just tons more. Some of the more popular ones like singleton and mediator and command and strategy, abstract factory. Some of them get more airtime than others. Some of them are more common or have really taken off more so than others in the past, 2+, actually almost 3 decades. But either way, you should know about these common patterns because they're already named, they're already described, and a good number of people are already trained in what these mean and how to use them and what problems that they solve. So we're gonna go through, and then we're gonna talk about when to create your own design patterns and when just to use one that's already out there. All right, let's talk about the elements of a design pattern. Again, this is an engineering practice that allows us to go faster by having a discussion on a higher order of abstraction. Instead of in the weeds talking about individual lines of code and individual methods, we can talk about a pattern, the way lots of different code files and lots of different objects work together. But there's multiple elements of a design pattern. The first one is the problem. If there's a tension or an issue in the software, why do we even need anything in the first place? Why do we desire to have some type of improvement? And there's always some condition in our code that we want to be improved. Okay, we have that desire to have it be improved. If there's duplication, if we see the same types of things over and over again, then sometimes the code screams out for us, hey, we need a pattern to simplify this, or we need a pattern so that we're not copying and pasting these same half a dozen lines of code in multiple places. Or hey, we're doing the same type of thing over and over and over again. We need a pattern so that we can get it done more quickly. So there's always going to be a problem or a tension or an issue, a desire to make something better. And then the pattern offers that solution. And there's so many patterns out there. That means there's so many solutions to common problems that are out there. And the solution is it is the pattern itself. It's the way of organizing that code to resolve the problem. And you put those two together and it always yields some type of benefit. And you need to be able to articulate the benefit. And that is the concrete advantage that you get when applying the pattern. And you should be able to demonstrate that. If you're having an argument of, oh, I used this pattern and this is the way the code looks after this pattern, and this is the way the code's going to look when we do 10 more things of the same type of thing. And someone else is saying, okay, I see what you did is different, but I don't see that it's better. Well, in that case, you might not have a concrete benefit. Okay, so the point is not just to organize the code differently. The point is to organize the code so that the original tension goes away. The original problem is actually solved. And then finally, a design pattern has a language. It has a name that describes this relationship between various elements of code. And it gives you this higher order concept so that as you use more and more design patterns, you have this language you can talk about as a team. You can say, oh yeah, the DB context, we're using that in a singleton in this particular service, but over here we're using it in a transient manner. Even those types of things are design patterns, or putting multiple things together. CQS, command query separation, makes use of observer for the events, and it makes use of command for the command. And just being able to talk about those and have people know what you mean is a benefit. And so it gives you more language to use in your team. And remember, you can't, if you were to ask me, hey, I've never used the observer pattern, can you put the observer pattern in a Git repository so that I can use your code? That really doesn't apply. A design pattern is not code. A design pattern is an idea. And then you apply that idea to your software and you get some code that looks a certain way, but the code implementing it is merely an example of the idea, okay? So the design pattern is an idea and it has the 4 elements: a problem, a solution, a benefit, and then a language or a name. And so if you're trying to understand a design pattern, or if someone is describing a design pattern that has been implemented, well, the first thing with anything, if you're going to design something, if you're going to try to build it according to a design, what's the first thing you have to do? You have to be able to draw it. Okay, and give credit where credit is due. This is from the Gang of Four book, and specifically from GOFpatterns.com. This diagram itself on the observer pattern, and you can see that there is an abstract class subject, which has a dependency on a abstract observer. Then there is a implementation or an inheritor, that is the concrete subject, inherits from subject, and that's going to have a get state and a set state. And because the concrete subject is inherited from subject, that means it also has an observer, but the concrete observer that inherits from observer has a direct dependency on concrete subject. And so you have this two-way relationship at runtime, but from a dependency perspective, you don't. And so the concrete subject, of course, inside the set state method is going to call the abstract observer's update method. Okay. And then, of course, the concrete observer is going to have an implementation of update. So you ought to be able to draw with UML or UML-like, box diagrams with arrows for inheritance and arrows for direct dependency. You ought to be able to draw the design pattern to give even the elements of it names. Notice that in the observer pattern, we have observer as a name and we have subject as a name. And then, of course, concrete to give some understanding to that. Again, wanted to give credit where credit is due, gofpatterns.com. The link to the right, /behavioral/patterns observer. The link is to some sample code that is a part of the website. If you want to see the code sample, it's four different code files. But I just wanted to stress, when you're using a design pattern and to get the two of you on the same page, you want to make sure that you draw it. Either pull up a reference drawing or go to a whiteboard or pencil, it doesn't matter, and draw it up, okay? So kind of to close out, a design pattern is going to help us get out of the weeds. It fills the team's language with patterns, with higher order concepts. And so I encourage you to create your design language. As you're leading your team, and you notice that there's duplication across the code base, or people are struggling, maybe that's the need for more design patterns. Make sure that you're naming these design patterns that you're using. And when any member of your team is coming up with a new design pattern, make sure that you go through the process of drawing it. Make sure that we can articulate the problem that exists in the code base, then be able to demonstrate and draw the solution, a different way to organize the code. Make sure that you agree that there's an actual benefit to organizing the code in this different way. And then after that, it's all good. Give it a name and stick with the name, okay? Chances are the design patterns that you are going to have in your team, in your software, is going to be a composition of lower level design patterns that are standard and published across the industry. And that's great. You want to compose lots of these lower level and more generic design patterns into larger domain specific design patterns for your team, for your market, for your industry, for your users. And then your team can go faster and faster and faster, because as new enhancements comes through, as new features come through, you'll be able to say, oh yeah, we can use such and such pattern, and that thing will be implemented because we've done so many of them before. And then you can go faster, okay? So it makes your language richer, and it speeds up your design process, and it keeps your code base more consistent. And then you'll be able to embed the names of these patterns into the types, the namespaces, the types, and the methods of your code base, so that when people come into the code, they can read it, they can scan the code, and they can understand exactly how the code is organized and what the design intent is. Well, the hibachi supper was delicious. The entire family loved it. And that's because I didn't try to invent on the fly a new recipe or a new food pattern. I just stuck to it. I researched it. I applied it. I cooked the rice like it needed to be cooked. I cooked the chicken and the shrimp, and I followed the recipe, and I was able to talk with the family about the different elements, and they understood the pattern because they had hibachi before. Design patterns are the same thing. It is a design language for your team. There are patterns throughout the industry that you can research and train all of your team members on, and then you can use them. And then you can create your own higher order patterns that are a composition of the lower level patterns that are published in the industry. And your team will move faster and faster because the time from going into the code and understanding a particular area of code is a lot quicker because you have that higher order language. And when you're designing new features and new changes, you'll be able to identify patterns that you've established for your team. And we'll just use this pattern we've used before, and then the team can go a lot faster. Okay. Remember, when you think that you need a new design pattern, make sure that you go through the steps. Make sure that you can articulate the problem. Whatever you don't like about the code, that's your problem. I don't like it this way. Here's an issue. Here's a tension. And the second is the solution. Here's how we're going to organize it in a different fashion. And I contend that it makes it better. And then you need to be able to back up the benefit, and everybody on the team should be able to see, oh, yes, this is the benefit. Okay. And then after that, you give it a name and you make sure that the name makes sense for that pattern. And now you have a new team pattern. And every market, every industry, every type of software, financial, manufacturing, embedded, you're going to have domain specific patterns for yourself that undoubtedly are a composition of lots of other patterns that make sense in your software. So hope this helps. Again, design patterns help you increase your speed. Speed is a pillar of the Clear Measure way, along with establishing quality, achieving stability, and then increase your speed and keep increasing it and go really fast. Hope that helps. Thank you for programming with Palermo, and God bless.
You've been watching Programming with Palermo, your primary place for highly productive programming protocols and practices. Remember, you have what it takes. You can do this. You are a programmer, formed by God Himself and called to this profession for a purpose. You can catch every episode at Palermo.network, as well as syndicated locations nationwide. We're so glad you tuned in. Until next time, may God bless you, and thanks for Programming with Palermo. Programming with Palermo has made a special arrangement with Marketplace Chaplains. Besides programming challenges, we all face issues in life where we need some help. If you'd like, you can call a chaplain confidentially. To speak with a gentleman, dial 512-923-8178. Or to speak with a lady, dial 512-619-6950. The show won't know you called, and everything is kept in strict secrecy. This is a free service, available if you or a friend need it.